I have been working in the presidential journalist pool for 20 years. I have observed many of your trips. I remember the times when you had non-stop business trips to European countries. And there was a constant desire on the part of Russia to interact and build relationships. At what point did you realize that these so-called partners of ours were not really our partners? This was clear from the very beginning of the 2000s. Still, we had illusions, and I did too, which consisted of the following. I and many others, I am sure, at that time proceeded from the fact that there were problems in the relationship between the Soviet Union and the so-called West, which were based on ideological differences. On the one hand, there was a communist regime, and many considered it a de facto tyranny. And on the other hand, there was a democratic world led by the United States. Many people thought, including me, oddly enough, I worked in the intelligence service of the Soviet Union for many years, almost 20 years. I also thought that our main contradictions were of an ideological nature. But when the Soviet Union was no more, there was no communist regime. But the careless attitude towards the state strategic interests of the Russian Federation remained. Not just a careless attitude, but all this was tied to their obvious desire to achieve some geopolitical advantages. Moreover, when I became president, I also did not immediately understand everything. I began to convey to my Western colleagues, look, you say one thing, but you do another, and here is the evidence. And I gave them this evidence. They nodded their heads at me. They said, yes, of course, we will restore order now. And nothing happened. Everything was exactly the opposite. It became obvious to me that ideology probably had some significance. But all these contradictions are still based on geopolitical interests. This is the most important and fundamental thing. And I mean that the Soviet Union committed an auto-da-fé. It liquidated itself, including, I think, I never discussed this with my predecessors. We proceeded from the fact that Russia would become part of the so-called civilized world. But no, the West decided otherwise. Well, if the Soviet Union no longer exists, then why should they observe anything, any rules, in relation to Russia, which does not have the potential power that the Soviet Union previously had? Well, now they have decided to carve out something for themselves, the way they want, and they have decided to live by the rules that they have come up with for themselves, ignoring our interests. Well, they did it gradually. I won't go into details now, because we offered them a lot of things, both in the area of strategic offensive weapons and in the area of missile defense. They constantly and repeatedly rejected everything. Well, then it became clear that until we declared ourselves as an independent, sovereign power capable of defending its future, they would not take us into account. In those recent times, when we were trying to copy everything from the West, these were the 1990s, many then practically worshipped the United States. Was there really such a story? Then, when you worked in the St. Petersburg mayor's office, a high-ranking delegation flew to us in St. Petersburg, a high-ranking American delegation. And one of the Americans either pushed or treated a Russian in some rude way on the airfield. And when you found out about this, you refused to receive this delegation in the St. Petersburg mayor's office. Did that happen? To be honest, I don't really remember anything like that. You know, yes, maybe, yes, probably, that happened. I understand what you're talking about now. There was such an episode, to be honest, insignificant. Some delegation really did come to St. Petersburg. And one of the members of this delegation treated our border guard in some rude way. That's what happened. Yes, that's for sure. I thought it was a customs officer. No, it was a border guard. I decided that this was absolutely unacceptable, because this is a man in uniform. And when he performs his official duties, he represents the state. And to treat him in this way means to treat our state with disdain. And, of course, we did not refuse to receive this delegation. We worked with them as expected. Everything is stipulated by the protocol. But I simply did not communicate with them. That's all. Almost forgotten are the feelings of justice and politics, morality, the fact that not everything is permissible, as some people think. Some things are simply indecent to do. In general, the concepts of justice, morality, good, evil, are they applicable in big politics? Are they possible? You know, first of all, of course, in big politics, as you said, geopolitical interests are at work. But for our country, for our people, still, bearing in mind its peculiarities. Still, the issue of morality and ethics is important. Well, lawyers have their own postulates in legal theory, one of which is the assertion that law is always moral. And morality can also be law, common law, that is, a custom that is observed by everyone. Therefore, these are all interconnected categories. Munich Conference of 2007. Western leaders are watching with surprise as Russia calls what is happening in world politics by its proper names. You made it clear to them that you, friends, so to speak, are generally behaving very hypocritically. Well, yes, in a sense it was risky, because Russia itself opposed these trends that were gaining momentum in the world at that time. Incidentally, I wrote my speech in Munich while I was flying on the plane. While we were flying to Munich, I looked at the preliminary draft of what my colleagues had prepared for me. I put it aside, and I rewrote the whole thing. It is not because we wanted to have a confrontation and argue with someone. No, it is simply that Russia is a country that cannot live any other way. And therefore, I considered it right and timely to formulate our concerns. Moreover, you can believe me, I have seen that the same concerns arise among a very large number of other participants in international communication. It is simply that, bearing in mind the global power of the United States itself, they kept silent and kept their mouths shut. But, I repeat, I did not say this to argue with anyone or to somehow oppose Russia. We simply cannot live any other way. Russia will either be independent and sovereign, or it will not exist at all. And this is what I wanted to convey to our partners in the hope that they will hear us and somehow adjust their attitude towards Russia, keeping in mind that, let's say, back in the 1990s they promised us, say, not to expand NATO to the east. But at every step they lied to us. They constantly deceived us, pretending that nothing like this had happened. And on many other issues, all this happened. Therefore, it seemed to me that it was time to tell our colleagues that we must live in harmony. Let's treat each other with respect, without imposing our will, without trying to suppress the will of others, taking into account the interests of all participants in international communication. I don't know how effective it was, but you see, since it is often remembered, well, apparently it was still timely. That's what I want to say. But, unfortunately, it was not heard by them. We made constant, I want to emphasize this, constant attempts to improve relations in order not to bring it to the situation in which we find ourselves today, and to develop some kind of uniform rules. In some former colonial empires, in Great Britain, in France, they consider us guilty of the fact that all their colonial empires fell apart. And this historical memory, this historical negativity is still preserved by them. I see it, strange as it may be. Sometimes it's funny for me to look at it, but I record it in small details. I'm not making this up. I see it. But the point is that the United States of America after World War II, together with the Soviet Union, by the way, worked to a certain extent to destroy these empires. We worked to assist the colonies in gaining their independence and sovereignty. You once said that one of your characteristics includes one of your negative traits, a reduced sense of danger. In critical situations, you remain, as it says there, too calm. Does this feeling help you and us or hinder us? I believe that this characteristic does not reflect the true state of affairs, that it is erroneous. I will explain what I am talking about. This characteristic, which was given to me, was written by specialist psychologists during my preparation for work in illegal conditions, in the illegal intelligence of the Soviet Union. During the preparation and identification of the characteristics of the personal business qualities of a candidate for this job, all sorts of artificial situations are created that are associated with risk, with danger. And psychologists analyze human behavior. But the thing is that I was hired for this job from the operational staff before, that I had already worked as an operative for several years, and I saw that some of the activities that were carried out in relation to me were artificial and operational in nature. That is, these are not situations associated with real risk, but these are artificial situations. Well, that is why I behaved perhaps calmer than any other normal person in such a situation. Although, of course, I was not 100% sure that this was an artificial and operational situation, but nevertheless, to a large extent, I proceeded from the fact that this was not a combat situation. Therefore, I think that, in my opinion, their assessment here was not accurate. In any case, I try to build my practical work, especially in such a responsible position as the head of state, in such a way that measures 7 times and cut once. A few weeks ago, meeting with young scientists, you said the following words, that the future begins right now. What kind of future is beginning for us? And what is the future of Russia? Indeed, I said this at a meeting with scientists, and we discussed issues that are important for the new technological order that is coming now, which affect all areas of our lives. And I said this in relation to the fact that everything is changing very quickly and right now. Well, recently we all saw how our Chinese friends announced the creation of new artificial intelligence platforms that work much more efficiently than everything that was before. But pay attention. It costs 10 times less than everything we knew before. 10 times. This is efficiency. And it is really happening right now, before our eyes. The future in this sense begins now. As for Russia, we must keep in mind that Russia is the largest country in terms of territory. It is the largest country in the world. But in terms of population, in terms of the number of citizens, we are far from first place in the world. We have a huge territory and a population of about 150 million people. This is a clear disproportion. In order not only to preserve everything, but also to develop successfully, we need to be leaders in the most important areas of development. But we will not ensure this future for our country if this development is not based on our history and, as we often say, on our traditional values, on the essential state of our society, which is passed down from generation to generation. Now, if we develop on this basis, on a moral, historical, traditional basis, then, of course, success awaits us. Thank you very much. Good night. Good luck. Goodbye. Good night. We need to take the microphone from you. Yes, please. Otherwise I will fall asleep with it, and you will be eavesdropping on me all night.